I think it's a very central topic in Jewish life. It's a topic that really dominates really everything that we're kind of focused at. If you were to really distill every focus of Jewish life and behavior, you would end up at this destination. And that is the idea of a mitzvah. You know, the idea of a mitzvah has been kind of corrupted a little bit in modern society. Mitzvah has been kind of demoted from being what it is as a commandment to being a good deed. Yeah. You know, the word mitzvah, if you know Hebrew, tzivui, is an instruction. If you were in the Israeli army, they said, okay, I'm giving you a commandment, a tzivui or a mitzvah, to do something. You say, well, it's a good deed. It might not be a very good deed, at least depending on what your standards are of good deeds. But a mitzvah is a central element of, I guess it's at the epicenter of Jewish life, philosophy, certainly, and practice as well. And I think a good question that a lot of people ask is, why do we do mitzvahs? Not only that, I think people ask, okay, we could do mitzvahs, but why do we have so many of them? You know, if the Almighty wanted to give us mitzvahs, clearly He did, you would think that maybe one mitzvah would suffice, or 10, or, 50. And the actual number of mitzvahs that we have is in the hundreds. In fact, the Talmud tells us, very famous, everyone knows how many mitzvahs we have?
613.
613. How do you know that?
That's how many commandments are.
But where do we know that from?
Rambam.
Well, we know it from the Talmud. Yeah. The Talmud says there's 613 mitzvahs, 248 positive, and 365 negative. But the Talmud actually doesn't never break down what's a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah. That's why, like you said...
Those categories?
Right, so they end up being, there's actually, if you count them, there's thousands. It's just that these are categories of mitzvahs, and many mitzvahs have subcategories of mitzvahs as well. And of course, the Rambam, like you said, was the first one to write the book called Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Book of Mitzvahs, where he delineates and starts counting mitzvah number 1, mitzvah number 2, and 3, and all the way to 248 positive and 365 negative. And of course, the Rambam always wants to make his job harder. So he says, I'm going to give you the mitzvahs, but I'm also going to order them in order of importance, which is interesting, because he starts off with the most important mitzvahs, and faith, and fear of God, love of God, and emulate God, all the kind of more, what we would say, more central to Jewish philosophy, Jewish, certainly, life and practice, and that, yes, go ahead, Ben.
Well, I have two questions.
Yes?
Is it assumed that it's in order of importance?
It's heavily implied. It's
so it's implied.
Yes, go ahead.
But isn't each mitzvah supposed to be equally as important? You don't know the cosmic significance of the mitzvah, what it does, what permeation it causes.
Well, that's a Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that we have to do all mitzvahs. We can't say, well, make a hierarchy. I'm just going to do the top 10, top 20, or 10% of the most important mitzvahs, and I'll ignore the rest of the mitzvahs. Right? You should have a ratz l'mitzvah kala kavachamur. You should chase. You should pursue an easy mitzvah, a light mitzvah, kind of one that, no big deal, right? As aggressively as you would pursue a major mitzvah. And I think a good question to ask is, why do we have so many mitzvahs? I think, where's the breakdown? The breakdown should either be we should have an infinite amount of mitzvahs, and maybe we do have an infinite amount of mitzvahs, maybe that's a good answer. But, wouldn't one be enough? What's the purpose of having such an abundance of mitzvahs? I think that's a questionable one I want to kind of establish as an introduction.
Okay. Question number
Go
two.
ahead. Question number 2. Thank you.
Any correlation between the number of negative mitzvahs and the number of days in a year?
Yes. Okay, so the Talmud tells us, this is the same Talmud Makros, tells us that there's 365 days of the year corresponding to 365 negative mitzvahs. We have 248 positive mitzvahs. Now, positive and negative mitzvah, positive means do something, right? Eat matzah, put on mezuzah. And a negative mitzvah says don't eat, pork, and don't eat all the things you're not allowed to eat, and don't do this and don't do that, and don't take a sacrifice out of Jerusalem and consume it out of Jerusalem, like more esoteric mitzvahs that there are. Now, Shana is not so esoteric.
It's
beyond our comprehension. Yes, but we can still fulfill it. Now, the 248 positive mitzvahs, we're told, they correspond to our 248 limbs, Evarim. Now, in the Midrash, which is a parallel book to the Talmud, it says that the 365 is not corresponding to days of the year, rather it's corresponding to sinews in a human body. So it's a little bit of it's more congruent, I would say, when you look at the Midrash and how it delineates the roles of the positive and negative mitzvahs. The positive mitzvahs correspond to the amount of limbs in the human body, and the negative mitzvahs correspond to the amount of sinews in the human body.
What is
A sinew is like a muscle. Now, which is interesting. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but I want to kind of shift gears there because I'm going to fuse these two ideas together. This was a recent epiphany of mine. We also have another idea that I would say is kind of the goal of the mitzvahs, or certainly the goal of Jewish life, and that's the idea of Olam Haba, which means the next world. And we call it the afterlife. It's a very poor translation because afterlife seems like the epilogue. Like life is central, and then there's what comes after. It's kind of like the dessert, so to speak, to life. In Judaism, it's the exact opposite. Here is the preparation. This is like where we're getting ready, and then the afterlife is actually life. So right now, we're actually in the corridor to life. So much so that the Talmud even compares life here to life in the next world as the life of a child in utero, a fetus, an embryo, and that's the life there. That's just a preparation for them to come out into real life. But if you were to zoom in onto the embryo, and you were able to communicate with him or her or them, and you said to them, "What's life?" Well, they say, "This is life." And then, maybe there's an afterlife. Maybe yes, maybe no, right? That's what they would say because that's where their world ends. That's the only perspective that they have. But we know, because we know that that's just a preparation. Talmud says, well, that's exactly the same thing. Here, in this life, this is our gestational period where we're getting ready to kind of come to term and to live a real life. That's what the Talmud, which is a very hard thing for us to accept because we're not used to thinking in those terms. We're thinking, okay, this is life. If I behave, I'm a good Jew, and I do the right thing, maybe I'll have a portion in some other life. I won't just be like dead on arrival and just disappear. I'll just be buried and be gone forever. I'll have something else. That's the way we think. But it's exactly the opposite. That life is life. This is just the corridor, just the hallway, so to speak, that we're taking just to get to the destination, which is interesting. But if you look at Jewish sources, you'll find that the goal of the Jew, indeed the yearning, the striving, the sum total of a life well lived, is earning a ticket to Olam Haba. In fact, the Mishnah tells us that all Jews have a portion of what to come. Kol Yisrael yesh lam chet Olam Haba. All Jews have a portion of what to come, unless you do horrible, egregious sins. Right? It's like the Rambam gives us a list, the aforementioned Rambam, the Mishnah tells us a list of people, the gravest sinners. Those are the ones that they lose their portion in Olam Haba, in what is poorly translated as afterlife. And my question is, how do we obtain Olam Haba? And does that maybe have a connection with the mitzvahs and the abundance of mitzvahs that we have as those being tickets to access Olam Haba? So we're kind of approaching it from both angles. So this is kind of the introduction. Now, Lutzato is one of the first two places you would go if you want to know what Jews believe about something. Probably you would go to the Rambam, because he's, of course, the great codifier of halacha, of philosophy, of Jewish everything. Certainly he would probably be the first place you'd go, and then you would go to Lutzato because despite living, a mere, 39 years and being exiled. Can you imagine what people who are 39, who were kicked out of their place, had to relocate, managed to write like 150 books, all of them that are like absolute classics. But either way, he is one of the places that we go to understand
Who's this?
Rabbi Lutzato, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, known by his acronym Ramchal. If that name sounds familiar. If you have a book called The Way of God, Derech Hashem, it is a very wonderful single volume, which is nice because sometimes, Talmud is great, it gives you all the answers, but it's 63 books, right? Who got time for that, right? But Lutzato writes this book called The Way of God, which will explain to you all of Jewish philosophy. Everywhere, beginning from theology to theodicy to all aspects of understanding the Jewish perspective on life, which is fantastic. But he says like this.
Is that book available in English?
Yes, it was translated many, many different times. Art Scroll has a translation, Feldheim has a translation. I'm sure there's like some sort of Cincino, I'm sure everyone translated it. It's a classic. He lived 1707 to 1746. He was in Italy, and then he moved to Israel as a young man. And of course, he died as a young man as well. He died in a plague that swept through northern Israel. We know that there was a renaissance of Jewish civilization in northern Israel in the late 15th and then 16th and even early 17th and 18th centuries. So especially in northern Israel, Tzfat, of course. So he was there, and there was some sort of plague that swept through, and he died at a very, very young age in relative obscurity, but his books really carved out a place for him in Jewish immortality. Either way, so he says that when he in his book called Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Just, which may be a book that you've heard of, because that is also considered the single volume to Jewish, to Musar, to do with ethical behavior, how to live a good life as a Jew, and what are kind of the stages of growth as an individual in your behavior and your ethical character. That's his book. So he starts off like this. He says, the goal of every person is to find what their purpose is in life. And as Jews, we know our purpose is to have the absolute pleasure, which doesn't sound like really what Jews do, which is interesting, but let's put that aside. And this pleasure, indeed, is, and we can talk about this next week, if you guys invite me back. And this pleasure is indeed in Olam Haba. And if you look at all the sources, and I can give them to you, email to you, there's all the sources about Olam Haba. It's a place of consumption. Just like imagine you are walking down a long corridor to get to the big ballroom where the event is, and then, but there's one catch. The catch is that your actions that you do along the way are going to determine what kind of status you get when you get to your destination. So, thus, the goal is certainly the destination, but the way to get there, the means to get there, the time that was spent over here, that determines what kind of life of consumption we have in the real world. And says Lutzato that the goal of the Jew is to have pleasure, the highest level of pleasure. And he says there's obviously different levels of pleasure, which is an interesting idea, just as a side. And the place of the pleasure is in Olam Haba. But the way to get it is this world with doing mitzvahs. So Ramchal, very clearly at the beginning of his book, Mitzvot Yesharim, he connects these two ideas, and he says that the goal of life is to get Olam Haba, but the means to get Olam Haba is mitzvahs. Thus, we find a kind of fusion of these two ideas. And my question that I want to ask is, how does doing a mitzvah equate with achieving immortality, so to speak, or eternity, or creating a legacy for yourself that lasts forever? And what I found recently, and I kind of clarified this actually yesterday, was that there's actually multiple paths, and that to me is fascinating. Yes, Ben.
So there's God judges us here, right? So based on where we are in our status. So like Moshe, he hit the rock, he got severe punishment more than if I hit the rock.
Yeah, it's like
right?
boxers, right? You got boxed within your weight class.
Yeah. So is that I know you were saying metaphorically when you enter Olam Haba, you have your status, but how's that determined? Like, is God judging me on the same playing field as as him, or if we all do if we do the same mitzvahs,
So
I always learned that you're judged on what your potential is, what your ability is, not like how come you
Right.
couldn't be like Moses, how come you couldn't be like this person, that person, how come you couldn't be the best you, how come you couldn't do it.
And I'll tell you something cool, which kind of brings your point. The Rambam tells us, when he talks about the laws of repentance, he says that every human, every Jew, every human can be like Moses, which sounds obviously the exact opposite of what you said, but really he's saying the same thing. Moses was fantastic because he achieved his potential. He matched out his potential. Now his potential happened to have been infinitely greater than any one of us. Even if we max out our potential, we can't become prophets. But we can be as great as Moses in as much as we fulfill the amount that we were allocated, the capacity we were allocated. But that indeed proves your point, that everyone has a tailor-made soul and a tailor-made body and tailor-made circumstances and tests and nisyonot that create their spiritual world, and they're judged as individuals. And that's why, by the way, we don't judge, because it's for the Almighty to judge. Who's to say that your blood is redder than your fellow? Maybe his blood is redder than you. There's no way for us to know who's better than someone else. There's no way.
And supposedly, like, every obstacle we can overcome, because God wouldn't put something in front of us that you can't overcome when it comes to doing right or wrong.
Yes. But everyone's obstacle will be different, right? None of us are given the same obstacles that Abraham was given. Obstacles or tests, however you want to, like the go sacrifice your kid. That wasn't one of our tests, I don't imagine. If it is, don't do it. Okay, so my question is like this. How, we know that the goal of life is to get Olam Haba. We know that the means to get that is with mitzvahs. My question is, how does doing mitzvahs equate to getting a portion of world to come? Do I have to do all of them, to do some of them, to do one of them? Doesn't matter how I do it. All these questions, and I found that there are at least 3 paths. And to me, this was very fascinating. And perhaps even there's some shortcuts, which I told this to one of my students. He's like, Rabbi, you got to give us a class in spiritual shortcuts. We just want to know, just give us the easiest way to do it. I say, just be careful what you wish for, because I'll give it to you, but you're not going to like it. I'll give it to you guys here, you won't like it either. Okay, so let's go back to the idea we started here with. We have 248 positive mitzvahs corresponding to the human body. And then we have the 365 negative mitzvahs corresponding also to another facet of the human body. Is that a coincidence? Were the mitzvahs given to us to mirror who we are? Or is it maybe the opposite true? Clearly, it's not a coincidence, right? What about, why? Like, is it just like, every limb has a corresponding mitzvah? Do we know what that is? And also, like, what does that, what does it mean that is it just a coincidence? Really nice. Oh, there's 248 limbs. And by the way, do we even know what these 248 limbs are? Is every finger considered a different limb? Is it bones? What is it exactly?
I'm sure to the sages, there's no such thing as coincidence.
Clearly. And we know that. That's as Jews who are trained to study Torah very critically, we know that it's not possible that this is just a coincidence. That, whoa, how cool is that? Let's just write it down and put it for posterity. The answer is that the goal of the mitzvahs is to purify us. Thus we can say that every mitzvah makes us complete in the corresponding limb. In fact, if we were to go back to that Renaissance that happened in northern Israel, we find another great Jewish writer, whose name I don't remember, but who wrote a book that he's known by, called the Sefer Charedim. Sefer Charedim is a book on mitzvahs, but what he does is he says, I'll tell you which mitzvahs correspond to which limb. And he explains the whole book is based upon this principle, is that with the observance of the mitzvahs, we are kind of creating this avatar of ourselves. It's as if you do a mitzvah that corresponds to your left forearm. Now you kind of earned your left forearm. They're like, that is something that you accomplished. It's yours in a spiritual sense. You do all the mitzvahs, and you have completion. And that is who you are spiritually. If we look at people, we could see what they are physically. We could see what they are physically. How do we know what they are spiritually? That we can see, obviously. But what does that even mean? Are we all the same? We all have a soul. Okay, that we know. All humans have souls. Okay, so is every soul the same? Well, everyone's body is different. Is it possible the souls would also be different? You would think so, right? We're kind of used to thinking. This goes back to the original problem. We have kind of a very much of a body and physical-centric view of the world. Like, we think this is the real world, and this next world is some other world which is less significant than ours. And in concert with that, we think of like our body as being who we are and the soul being kind of there, right? But really it's the opposite. Our soul is really who we are, and the body is kind of just there. But even amongst our bodies, we see that people are different. So certainly our souls are different. But our souls, we have a say in deciding how we're going to formulate our souls. Our actions, like we said, like this world that we're going towards, we earn it with our actions. We create our spiritual life, our spiritual existence with our actions. We do all 248 mitzvahs. We complete all 248 spiritual limbs that comprise our spiritual existence. Almost in a weird way, of course, this is oxymoronic. Our spiritual body, kind of if you visualize it like that, is comprised of our mitzvahs. Thus, it's not a coincidence at all that there's the exact same amount of mitzvahs as limbs, because they're designed, they're complementary. Who you are spiritually is determined by how many of these 248 spiritual limbs you earned. And this would, of course, explain why we have so many mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs are because we're so complex. Or I'm saying maybe we could have been that much more complex, and then we'd have that many more mitzvahs. But either way, the answer to the question, why we have so many mitzvahs, is the same answer as why are we? You know?
Couldn't that be when it says God created man in his image, since the mitzvahs is from God, that's the image he was created in?
So that's an interesting question. What does it mean in created in God's image? Because clearly it's not.
I know.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Not. So I'm just saying, but I'm just wondering, that just struck me that the mitzvahs are from God, and it said the Torah came before the universe. The Torah
Yes.
is the blueprint for the universe, so the mitzvahs are the blueprint. So if you're created in God's image, that's the spiritual image of those mitzvahs.
So I think, which is interesting, because now that you're bringing the fact that the Torah precedes the world, is it possible that the reason why we have 248 limbs is because the Torah, the blueprint, so to speak, dictated that the amount of instructions needed to perfect man is 248 plus 365. Thus, when man was formed, means that came afterwards, which is a weird way of thinking. Like, we think of, okay, we have us, and now let's fix us with mitzvahs. And perhaps what it is, right, in line with what you're saying, David, is that, no, like the Torah came beforehand, and thus when God said, let us make man, right, in chapter 1 of Genesis. Well, how are we going to make man? Well, man is going to be the purpose of this Torah, that they could use the mitzvahs of the Torah to change. The reason why we're unique is because we're dynamic. A human does not need to remain in the same status that they were. In fact, they're not going to. They're either going to ascend or descend. They're either going to progress or regress. That's the human condition. Right? We can choose, thus, our status is in flux, in limbo, and it's up to us and our decisions to determine, are we going to become great, or are we going to, descend morally, spiritually, and bring the world down with us as well. So that's an interesting idea, that perhaps, indeed, it was the opposite, that the man was formed to fit the model that the Torah already had, not that the Torah was there to fix the already pre-existing mold of man, which is a very interesting idea. I don't know for sure, but I like where you're going there. Yeah, very interesting. So like this, just think about kind of what pressure this puts on us. we say, okay, we're going to do mitzvahs. Well, I want to do mitzvahs, but there's mitzvahs that kind of jive with me. Some mitzvahs are kind of like, I don't understand them, or I don't know, they're for me. But when we realize that when you do a mitzvah, it's not like you're doing God a favor. That doesn't need your favors, clearly, right? If you subscribe to any theological stream of thought, God doesn't need your favors, right? Clearly, you're doing it for yourself. Mitzvahs are for ourselves. So we say, all I need is 4 or 5 mitzvahs, or 200 is fine, 248. But if we think about it in the sense that we're building kind of our spiritual body, how uncomfortable is the following question? Like if I told you, okay, I want you to try to just imagine what's more painful, like to have your left arm amputated, your eyeball gouged out, or your fingernail just pulled off? That's a very uncomfortable question. And now, you'll survive, right? I'm not saying we should try this at home, right? This is an analogy, right?
Let's try all 3 and see which is the...
Right, but why...
Who volunteers?
No, but just to think about it, which one would if I had to choose one, why don't we do those exercises? Because to us it's unthinkable to look at ourselves, as a collection of limbs and organs. No, we're one human, right? And to start prying things off, that takes away from who we are as a human, right? If we ignore some mitzvahs, we say, those mitzvahs are not for us. We're essentially doing that to our soul. And then indeed it makes a lot of sense what the Mishnah says that David quoted. We can't say, these mitzvahs are not so important. Your pinky, ring toe, whatever, your ring toe or your left foot. Who cares, right? We don't do that, right? We don't say, come on, you can walk without it, right? Do you really need it? We don't say that. And you know what? You're right. You don't really need it. But do we want to give up on it? Would we say, no big deal? That's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is us. When we do a mitzvah, we earn ourselves, so to speak. We're earning our spiritual avatar. That's going to be us in the world to come. We're going to say, you know what? All I need is a brain, a heart, maybe a liver, a couple of legs, right? I don't need all the other trappings.
One eye.
Right? Yeah, you can see perfectly fine, right? Okay, maybe distance, like you can't really, really? Is that what we're going to worry about? And when we see this idea of the mitzvahs are our organs and limbs, suddenly like, whoa. No, I'm not giving up on any one of them. And that, of course, is a terrifying thing, but also, if you think about that, what kind of value do we now have for a mitzvah? A mitzvah is not some favor we're doing for our parents or for God or for the Sunday school teacher or I'll just, squelch some, religious guilt. No, it's for us. We are building our spiritual body.
You're also going to keep it.
Exactly. So you have to earn it, you have to maintain it, sustain it, nourish it, and preserve it. Absolutely. But, just this thought, really suddenly whoa, mitzvahs are a different experience now than what they were before. I'm doing God a favor. Okay, I can't imagine God needs this, right? Really? A murder is fine, but cheeseburgers? Does God really care? Well, it's not about God. It's about God telling you that you can create something amazing, eternal, and it's you, it's not someone else, and you're the only one that could do it. And then, is it possible to get Olam Haba without fulfilling all of them? Maybe. Is it possible to live without all your limbs?
Well, there's some mitzvahs that we can't do right now.
Good question. I was hoping someone would ask that. I was not going to bring it up.
But davening, the rituals that we do take place for all those.
That's right.
Take place for the ones that we can't do anyway. That's why we have the Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv. They take the place of the sacrifices and the stuff in the temple and everything that we can't do anymore.
There's actually parts of the prayer that are dedicated to the reciting of the sacrifice procedures and services. And at the afterwards, we finish and say, if you pray to the Almighty, that let it be that my study and recitation of the process of these mitzvahs that I cannot fulfill should be equivalent as if I brought those.
We're trying to mimic the forefathers. Abraham was mourning, Isaac.
Well, as well, the Talmud tells both. The Talmud says is that the morning, afternoon prayers are either corresponding to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or they're corresponding to the morning, afternoon, and evening services in the temple. Right? Either way, but the point is that even beyond that, there's mitzvahs that we cannot fulfill. But when we study that corresponding Torah portions, we kind of earn that kind of spiritual limb, despite
by studying it.
By studying it, that's right.
Studying it and davening and
Without action,
Well, I'm saying studying is also an action, right? Studying is one of the hardest things to do.
Studying is not really it is, but it isn't. You can study all you want on top of a mountain, right?
Dishwasher, I'm sorry.
That's fine. You could. I'm saying it doesn't exonerate you from the mitzvahs that do require action. You have to do both. You have to do action and studying.
So basically, what you're saying is the mitzvahs that we can't do ascertain right now. We do in a different form of.
Yes, means there's
studying
ways
or
for us
davening.
to fill those gaps. Fill those holes. The Talmud tells us in the book of Menachos, page 100, that if someone who cannot fulfill an olah is a certain mitzvah in the Torah that we cannot fulfill anymore, but we study that part of the Torah and then we get the credit, so to speak, as if we fulfilled that mitzvah. So there's another way, alternative way to earn that quote-unquote limb. And to us, I think on one hand, this revelation is it's insightful and it's terrifying simultaneously. It's insightful because now a mitzvah really has more value. Like we understand why we're doing it and why so many of them. On the other hand,
how could we possibly do?
we could. It's just that we have to take life seriously.
Yeah, but it's a whole transformation of our existence to do that.
But that's really natural.
Yeah.
It's where we live in a distorted view. And that's why the Yetzer Hara is called a distortion in Jewish philosophy, because it distorts reality. It convinces us that this is the only world we've got, and thus it models or it molds our perspectives and our decisions and our priorities and our values and our agenda in life around that fallacy. And of course, we get the Torah, and it's like we get sober. Whoa, when we get shaken up because this is entirely inverted worldview. Everything's the opposite. And indeed, so like I said, it's terrifying on one hand, but on the other hand, it gives us a really, I think, wonderful appreciation of the value of every single mitzvah as a whole. We do all 248 plus 365, and kind of the 365 kind of holds it all in place, like the muscles hold the body in place. They don't actually do functions. Their function is just support staff, so to speak, for everything else that does function, right? And thus, the negative mitzvahs are there to kind of prevent us from kind of going awry, just like your muscles prevent your shoulder from popping out. Okay, so that's, I think this is probably the simplest way to get Olam Haba. We just earn it. It takes a long time, of course.
Do you get credit for doing the mitzvah, or do you get credit for the intent of the mitzvah? So I could,
Well, the Gemara tells us.
I could do
You
the
get partial
davening.
credit. You get like 2
Yeah,
points
do you?
off if you.
Do I get credit for doing the evening service? I'm not paying attention, or do I get credit if I, doing it, paying attention?
Yes, so this is a good question. Kind of once we're doing a mitzvah, how do we have to do the mitzvah properly? I want to hold off on that. I'm going to come back to that again.
gonna talk about
Yes,
the
I'm going to talk about not the procedure as much as kind of the intention. And you're right. I agree that you're right that for us to kind of earn our ticket Olam Haba using this path, it really is a lifelong effort to obtain it and certainly to preserve it. And that's okay. We have a life. That's what the life is for. Is it possible to just achieve it all in an hour? It's kind of like the Cliff Note. Where's the Cliff Notes? There's got to be
a chance, when go to free parking and get all the money.
Yeah. Right? Is there any way to obtain all of it while kind of standing on one leg, really? Like just get it all. Because this seems kind of hard, right? And obviously, if you could just earn it all in an hour, that'll be a lot easier. Right?
Oh,
Right?
I remember
Be careful what you
talking
wish
about
for.
this before, and like the only way to do that was to do it through death, but we're supposed to live. Like when,
Okay, so let me tell you the stories the Talmud says here. There's 3 stories here, and I have them written down here. They're all from the book of Avodah Zarah, and I'll tell them kind of quickly because the theme of the 3.
That's Rabbi.
Yeah,
That's Rabbi Akiva.
Akiva.
No, not Rabbi Kiva.
Rabbi.
I'll tell the story here. So this is from the book of Avodah Zarah.
He did that because he couldn't do the last one of the mitzvahs.
Right, Rabbi Kiva also died al Kiddush Hashem, but Rabbi Kiva didn't need it. I would assume Rabbi Kiva had even the more difficult path. So you guys tell me if these stories are familiar, okay? This is from the book of Avodah Zarah in the Talmud 10b. And once again, our goal here is to see if there's an easier way. All 248 mitzvahs, you got to do them, you got to preserve them, you can't miss any one because we don't want to be given up even on the smallest part of our limbs. Is there an easier way to do it? I'm looking for loopholes here, right? We're the accountants, right? We're looking for loopholes. Let's find some spiritual, legal loopholes that we can get some shortcuts to Olam Haba. Okay, so there's 3 stories in the Talmud that kind of mirror each other, and they're all within 7 pages of the same book of Talmud. The first one tells of a Caesar who hated the Jews. It doesn't tell us which Caesar it is, but of course, if you learn a little bit about Roman-Jewish relationships, you really find out that it could have been almost anyone. Caesar hated the Jews, and one day he's sitting there with his government, with his ministers, and he says like this. He says, let's say you have a wart or some sort of lesion on your foot. What are you going to do? You're going to cut it off or you're going to suffer? I say, well, you got to cut it off. So he says, listen, I have the Jewish people. They're bothering me. They're a thorn in my side. I'm just going to get rid of them. That's what he announces to his people. So one of the people there, the Talmud gives us his name is Ketia ben Shalom. This is how the Talmud addresses him. He said like this.
78. Okay.
First of all, he tells Caesar, you can't get rid of them. And he quotes a verse, that the Jews are at the 4 winds of the heaven. They'll always be around. Just like the world cannot exist without the winds, so too the world cannot exist without the Jewish people. One reason why you can't get rid of them. Another reason why you can't get rid of them is because what are they going to say? They're going to say, you're the first Roman emperor that slaughtered their own citizens. You can't do it. So Caesar's there, sitting there listening, and he tells him, you're right. I can't touch the Jews. But you know who I am going to touch? Who I will destroy? You. Because you spoke up to the king. So right away, they make a big procession. They're going to execute publicly Ketia ben Shalom. And this is a non-Jew, by the way. He's being led to execution. And as he's being led away, one of the Roman matrons said to him, pity the ship that sails without paying the tax. Which is a way of saying, you stood up for the Jewish people, but you're not even Jewish yourself. You didn't kind of pay the tax. You didn't convert to the Jewish people. So you're trying to kind of achieve this status, but you didn't pay the tax. So quickly, then throwing himself on his foreskin, he cut it away. He gave himself a circumcision. As he's being led away, he did himself a circumcision. And he says, here, I now pay the tax, and my ship can enter. As he's being thrown in the fire, which is not the way they kill him, in a circular fire, he made an announcement, all my possessions I'm going to donate to Rabbi Akiva. And by the way, to the historical note, Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues made a trip to Rome in the 90s. Not the 1990s, just the 90s. So yes, it might have been, it was Domitian or Nero or Trajan or could have been any one of them. Fine, he dies, standing up for the Jewish people, and a bat kol. A bat kol is a low-level prophecy, low-frequency prophecy, announced Ketia ben Shalom is invited to Olam Haba. That's the story. And then this is the epilogue. Rebbe, who's Rebbe? Rabbi Judah the Prince, he says, when he heard the story, he started crying. Why is he crying? He says, Yesh kona olama b'sha achas, v'yesh kona olama b'kama shanim. There's the guy who acquires his world after many years of toil and labor, 248 mitzvahs. You got to work and work and work and work till you get there. Yeah. And then there's one guy who woke up in the morning as a Gentile, nothing to do with the Jewish people, and at the evening he's dead, dying for the Jewish people, right? In martyrdom, and he right away has a world income. He achieved it in 1 hour. That's the story. And this is not the only story. There's 2 more of them. Quickly, I'll tell you them quickly. The next story is about a fellow by the name of Eliezer ben Durdai. This guy was Jewish, but he didn't exactly live a Jewish lifestyle. In fact, we're told that he was a connoisseur of prostitutes. There was no prostitute that he didn't patronize. And then he heard of this one prostitute at the other end of the world who was so talented and so expensive that she charged a whole bag of gold for her services. So he takes the bag of gold, and he travels a long way, and he has to cross through multiple rivers, and finally he gets there, and during the course of the events, there was a emission, says the Talmud. And then she tells him like this. She says to him, just like that emission will not go back to its source, you will never repent. And you know you hit rock bottom in life when you're getting musar, you're getting castigated by a prostitute. You know that it doesn't get much worse than that, much lower than that, right? This is really the bottom. So this guy, he gets all shaken up from this episode, and he goes. The story goes on. And he goes outside and he says, "Okay, who's going to pray for me?" He kind of metaphorically talks to the mountains. Will the mountains pray for me? The mountains won't pray for me. Will the sun and the moon pray for me? The stars pray for me? Oh, no one's praying for me. Will the heaven and earth pray for me? No one's going to pray for me. Right? And he realizes the only guy that can help Eliezer ben Durdai is Eliezer ben Durdai. He's the only guy who can help him. Right? Ein hadavar talui elabi. The only person that can matter here is me. So Talmud says he put his head between his knees and he started crying until he died. And when he died, a bat kol, the same prophecy, lobe of prophecy, said, Eliezer ben Durdai says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Durdai, you are welcome to Olam Haba. And when Rabbi Judah the prince, the great leader of the Jewish people, the president of the Jews, the Nasi of the Jewish people, and the redactor, codifier of the Mishnah, when he heard this, he started crying. Why? Some people worked a whole life to get there, and this guy got there in 1 hour. And the last story tells of Reb Chanina ben Tradion. Reb Chanina ben Tradion was one of the great rabbis of the time, and he was under Hadrian. Hadrian, remember, became emperor in the early 2nd century. And he went on a campaign to assassinate as many rabbis as he can. And they grabbed Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion while he was teaching Torah. He had a Torah scroll opened, and the Romans came in, and they grabbed him with the Torah scrolls. They take him outside, they make a public spectacle, they take the rabbi, and they wrap him with the Torah scroll. They put him on a pyre, and they light it on fire. You learn about the Romans, they were brutal. But in order to augment his suffering, they took tufts of wool, dunked it in water, and placed it on his heart so that way he wouldn't expire. And he's there suffering, and his students tell him, what do you see? What's going on? And he says to them, you know what I see? I see the parchment being consumed, but not the letters. The letters of the Torah scroll that are surrounding me are all flying up to heaven. And he's like, well, Rabbi, what's going on? Why don't you do something about it? He says, you know what? I'm not so worried. Because I'm dying with the Torah scroll. And the Almighty, who I know for sure cares of this terrible mistreatment of the Torah scroll, once he's taken care of the Torah scroll, he'll take care of me. Either way, his daughter's there, and she says to him, Daddy, just open your mouth and let the fire come in. to consume you. Why are you elongating the suffering? So he tells her, listen, the Almighty gave me a soul. He wants it back. Let him come take it back. I'm not giving it. I'm not hastening this. Either way, that's all these things that are happening. And you know who's standing there? The Roman executioner. And the Roman executioner tells him like this, Rabbi, do you promise me if I take away the wool and end your suffering, do you promise me that I have a portion of wool to come? And the rabbi tells him yes. So quickly he pulls off the wool, he ramps up the fire. Rabbi Hanina ben Tardi dies right away. The Roman jumps, the executioner himself jumps into the fire as well. And he dies, and a prophetic announcement is heard. Rabbi Hanina ben Tardi and the executioner are both welcomed to Olam Haba. And for the third time, when Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, known also as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy teacher, when he heard the story, he started crying and saying, like he said the previous two times, some people have to work the whole life to get to Olam Haba, and some people acquire it in 1 hour.
Cry and jump into a fire and you got it made.
Well, not really. Well, that's not really. Now,
I might pass on that one.
I know, but it seems like a little easy.
okay, so let's see what we know from this. What we know is that it seems like there's at least two ways, right? There's this one method, this one roadmap of like a slow grind over 80 years or 90 years of a life trying to do what's right and doing all the mitzvahs and trying to be the best person you could be and dedicating yourself towards a higher purpose and not getting caught up with all the mishigas, as they say back in New York, all the mishigas of this world, and really trying to to become a fantastic person and doing all the mitzvahs. 80 years, you achieved all your limbs, you're good to go. And then you go it all in one shot. You jump in, like the guys that jump in the pool, right? You dip your toe, one toe, then a half hour later, you're still not in the water, right? And then you have those crazy kids that just jump all the way in. Right? And then, yes, it's painful, but they're there right away, very fast. And this seems to be like a little workaround, like a little shortcut. All you got to do is what? What do you have to do?
Ultimate sacrifice, die.
Well, but why? Like what's going on over there? Like, you have to die? Why do you have to die? You have to sacrifice?
You're giving your whole life for the glory of God, for the glorification.
Okay, so let's try to understand this kind of in light of what we said previously. And I want to hear you guys see. I know this is a lot of. I was thinking like these ideas. I'm like developing these ideas over like multiple years, and like here I'm just giving you guys a torrent of it. Yeah. I apologize for that. But what do we say here? So first of all, let's analyze these stories. 3 stories of 3 people that are of unremarkable character, at least hitherto, right? Prior to that. And they all do some great act of martyrdom or sacrifice for the Jewish people, or in contrast to their previous behavior, they do tshuva, they repent, and they all end up dying, and then they all are, there's the announcement, and then we find a very critical epilogue to the story, that Rebbe, the great hero of the Jews, he starts crying. So the first question is, well, why did he cry? I always say the reason why he cried is because, it's like when the guy who wins the Powerball, he moves in next door to Bill Gates. And the guy's like, oy vey. I've been working since 1958. So I can achieve my fortune, and this doofus spent $2 and just did it overnight he's my neighbor now. Oy vey. That's what I always said as a little bit humorous. But the fact that Rebbe's crying. He's crying for whatever reason why he's crying. But either way, what he's telling us, what we find out about his crying is that both the person who spent their whole life trying to get Olam Haba and the person who got it in 1 second, in 1 instant, they're both the same. And that's why it's just, I guess it's emotional for him, the fact that some people spend their whole life to get to one place, and other people spend their life to get to the same exact place, but they don't spend their whole life, they just do it in 1 hour. perhaps we kind of deepen our understanding that we said prior. Prior, we were talking about you do all 248 mitzvahs, you achieve all, your whole life, so to speak. You're a spiritual avatar. You build yourself, and this is who you are spiritually. And then that's what you are, and that's what gets shipped to Olam Haba. Perhaps we can say it like this. A mitzvah is a choice that we do to dedicate ourselves to God. Right? Every limb that we have, every power that we have within our ability, every choice that we make, we have to choose what are our allegiances going to be. Now, we could choose, on one hand, to kind of follow this distortion that we have placed upon ourselves, that this is the only world that we've got. It's the same fallacy that maybe the child in utero feels, that this is all they've got, this is the only world that they have. And to them, it's unimaginable to think that there's anything bigger, better out there. But we could follow that, and thus our pursuits and our priorities and our decisions will follow along that path. And that's how we choose to kind of dedicate our abilities. A mitzvah is a decision to dedicate, at least on a small scale, but ultimately on a grander scale, to dedicate our life and our decisions to God, to this higher purpose, to this bigger picture, to this other world, to this deeper meaning in life, where life really matters. You know, it's ironic that the fact that we learn how important life is terrifying, which is weird. Like, whoa, now life is wonderful now. Isn't life that ever more grand? Yeah, but that terrifies me because I kind of liked it the way it was. But we can choose to live for a higher purpose and living for God. And thus, every mitzvah that we do is a little bit of building this spiritual edifice in which, brick by brick, we're slowly dedicating our lives to God. If someone dies for God, if someone says, I'm dedicating all my life to God, they're not building it brick by brick. They're actually jumping in entirely. Their very lives are dedicating to the Almighty for this higher purpose. So thus, the end result's the same. The question is, we all need to dedicate our entirety of our lives to God, to get to Olam Haba. How do you do that? Well, you do by mitzvahs, and thus you're dedicating brick by brick, limb by limb, right? Piecemeal. You're dedicating your life slowly to God, or you can just dedicate your life all at once to God by doing the ultimate mitzvah, which is to actually give up your life for this higher purpose. And that's why the Rambam tells us that these people are the greatest people that we have. These are the heroes of the Jewish people, are the ones that demonstrate with their life and their behavior and their choices that they actually are living for this purpose. Thus, this is what makes sense to die for. We all have things that we are willing to die for. Everyone has something because that's your purpose in life. When we develop our sensitivity towards making God our purpose in our life, certainly we're willing to die for that. But when we do that, we show with our pinkies, with our ring fingers, with everything, with all of our humanity, that we are living and thus even dying for God. So the end result's the same, that we have dedicated everything for God. Question is, are we going to do it brick by brick, mitzvah by mitzvah? Or are we going to do it entirely? But then the only way to do it is if you die. Because if you die, thus you're dedicating every single part of you to God. And that's why all these people had to die. But it's interesting that it's certainly thought-provoking or intriguing to think that that's really what it's about. It's about we have a mission. We have a goal. We have a purpose. And that is to see, are we going to choose to dedicate our lives to God? And we have mitzvahs that help us, because a mitzvah is the decision that someone would only do because God told him to do so. Someone mentioned shatnez. Right? Shatnez, don't wear a garment that has wool and linen mixed together. Does God really care? That's not the point. And that amplifies it. The point is, are you willing to do something even though you don't know why you do it, but you're doing it for God? And that demonstrates that you are living for that purpose. to us, we're so enmeshed and immersed in this world. We're looking for mitzvahs that have an impact in this world. To save people, or to feed the hungry.
We could see the purpose
Exactly.
of the mitzvah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That it's exactly. And to us, like, okay, those are the mitzvahs that we kind of really do with a gusto. But by having that perspective, we're ignoring the fact that, no, like, it's, in a weird way, it's even greater to do a mitzvah when you don't see the benefit from it, because you're really doing it because God told you, thus you're dedicating part of your life to God.
There's three classes of mitzvahs. One was just anybody would come up with, like, don't
That's right.
murder and things like that. Then there's ones for historical things like Pesach. There's a historical reason. Then there's the third class where just because, and there's no like.
Well, it's just because.
Like the vein in the meat, like why that?
Right. Well, I would say it's just because for us. It's just because.
Yeah. No. I'm saying
because
that
God, right?
From our point of view, it's just like. I told you so.
Yeah, but I will tell you something cool, and that is that there is this idea. I don't want to get too sidetracked because I want to finish this. That was good. It's good that you brought it up. I was going to mention it, but there is this idea that every mitzvah really has only the one purpose, that is to dedicate it for God. And even the mitzvahs that make sense. There's two ways to do that same mitzvah. Like we don't murder. Why don't we murder? Well, I wouldn't want to murder even if I wasn't Jewish or were commanded to by God. Yeah. And thus I fulfill a mitzvah. We all fulfill a mitzvah if we abstain from murder. But there's a higher level of saying I'm not murdering, not because it's abhorrent, but because God told me not to do it. And it's a higher level of a mitzvah because you're saying that you're linking a mitzvah to this grander purpose of dedicating life for God. And I'll tell you something cool, just to kind of finish that off here. Abraham is told, murder your kid. Perhaps the test is, are you not murdering your kid because it's abhorrent and anyone wouldn't murder their kid, or because God told you not to? Thus, Abraham is being tested in a mitzvah, in activity that we would abstain from regardless of whether or not God told us to. But the question that Abraham was being faced with, well, why are you not doing it? Are you doing it because it's abhorrent and it's disgusting and no one wants to do it? Or are you living for the higher purpose that the real reason why you're not doing it is for God? Thus, when God flips the switch on you and says, do it, well, you'll do it. Because it's a weird way, like when you give someone, in Israel, we know we used to give a lot of hitchhikes, right? People, right? You give a hitchhike to someone. I'm driving there anyhow. I don't care. Like, it's just a nice thing to do. I would do it even if I wasn't commanded by God to be kind and benevolent to others. But that's the wrong attitude. The right attitude is to say, I'm doing it because the Almighty told me to do it. Maybe I would have done it otherwise had God not told me to do it. But it's a grander mitzvah when I do it and I link it towards dedicating part of my life to God.
The story of Baal Shem Tov.
Yes.
Sitting there with his Hasidim, and a voice came from heaven saying that he did some minor thing and he lost his place in the world to come.
Okay.
So
He embarrassed someone.
Whatever it was, like he used his left hand instead of his right hand or whatever. But
Hasidic story.
Pardon?
Hasidic stories, they say.
Yeah, but the point is that so all his Hasidim started crying and screaming, "Oh my God! If he can't get into, if he can't make it into the world to come, what hope do we have? He's so high and this that." And meanwhile, the Baal Shem Tov starts singing and dancing with joy, and they think he went crazy, because he lost his place in here. He dedicated his whole life, and now he's losing his place in the world to come. They say, sit down, we understand. He goes, no, he's happy. And they go, why? He goes, his whole life he was always wondering if he was doing the mitzvahs to get the reward, that he was doing it to get the place in the world to come. Now that he knows he's not getting the place in the world to come, now he's doing the mitzvahs just for the love of, because God tells him to do it, and he has no other reasons, completely, with pure reason he's doing it. Then of course the boy said, just kidding, you're really going to a happy place in the world to come.
Okay, so that's a very interesting idea, because I think this is kind of, I would say probably where I actually have that idea in my notes, not from the Baal Shem Tov, but from the Rambam, that, to us, like this really, we tonight have upgraded our mitzvahs. We upgrade it certainly from the idea of a mitzvah being a good deed to a commandment. But even a commandment, it's a commandment that's not from kind of God's interest viewpoint, but rather from our viewpoint, that we benefit greatly from every mitzvah that we do because we achieve for ourselves a certain spiritual posterity.
Then we're doing it for kind of a selfish reason in a way.
Exactly.
Right?
We're doing it for ourselves. But,
Yeah.
okay, fine.
But I mean,
What's wrong with doing something for yourself? If you're not...
This is a higher level of...
Okay, so that's what I want to get to right now. And this is really the third way to do it. So we have way number 1, 248 mitzvahs. Way number 2 is your whole life, which is all 248 at once. It's not 248 actions. It's one action that equals 248, but the result is the same. We find another idea, another path here, which I think probably it'll be very comforting for us because, it's hard to do all the mitzvahs. It's certainly hard to give up our life for God. Of course, these are our goals, to give up our life or dedicate our life at least to God with all the mitzvahs. But we find another idea in the Talmud in Makos. The Talmud tells us that, quote, Rabbi Chanina says, Rabbi Chanina bar Akashya Omer, the Almighty sought to benefit the Jewish people, therefore He gave them Torah and mitzvahs. The Almighty wants to do for our betterment. He wants to improve our situation. That's why He gave us a lot of mitzvahs. Now, this was the question we started off with. Why do we have so many mitzvahs? Well, we have an answer. We have an answer. An answer is it's for our own benefit. Now, in light of what we said earlier, this maybe doesn't seem to jive, right? If we need to do all 248 mitzvahs to achieve Olam Haba, wouldn't it be easier if there was only 110 of them? Or 75? So why is it the Almighty is trying to benefit us by giving us a lot of mitzvahs? That's a question that everyone deals with. So the Rambam, in his commentary on Mishnah, he tells us like this. It's an amazing Rambam. He says like this, I have written down here in English. It is a fundamental principle of our faith that when a person does one of the 613 mitzvahs properly, and does it with absolutely no external intentions, just for the sake of doing the mitzvah that the Almighty told us, and because you love the Almighty, just for the Almighty, He will merit through it Olam Haba. One mitzvah, but just one mitzvah. But the mitzvah is done with absolute purity of intent. Then you get Olam Haba with that. And that's what it means in the Mishnah. Well, the Almighty wanted to benefit us, and therefore He gave us a lot of mitzvahs. You know why? Because when there's a preponderance, there's a lot of mitzvahs, it's not possible that we won't get at least one of them over the course of our lifetime that's done absolutely perfectly. And that's why the fact that we have so many mitzvahs is a boon for the Jewish people, because it almost guarantees that hopefully over the course of our lives we'll do at least we'll do one of them perfectly. And he tells a story, which is actually the story in that same Gemara that we read about Ruchanim ben Tradion, who was wrapped with the Torah scroll. So he asked someone, he was one of the great leaders of all time, the Jewish people, but he asked someone when the things were really getting bad in the Roman rule, he asked, I don't remember who he asked exactly, but he asked someone, do you think that I'm someone who's worthy of Olam Haba? And he says to them, tell me, did you ever do any good deeds? It's laughable, because Ruchanim ben Tradion was one of the great rabbis of all time, one of the great heroes of the Jewish people. Of course he did good deeds. But what does he say? He says, yeah, let me tell you what happened. There was once, Ruchanim ben Tradion he was in charge of the charity fund in his town. And there was once a time where some of the charity money and some of his own personal money got commingled. So he dedicated all the money to charity because he doesn't want to take money from charity. All of it he gave to charity. And the question is like this: if you live a life, that's a very nice deed. It's a very good deed. But if you live a life where you're dedicating your life to Torah, to God, to mitzvahs, to the Jewish people, is this the only thing you can find? This one time you had the money mixed together into mingled, and you donated it? That's really what you can find? The answer is, what he was looking for is one mitzvah that you know for sure you did it, not because people will look up to you, not because people will think, oh, this guy is so special. It's just because you love God and you want to do what's right and you want to be a good agent of the message of the Jewish people, the message of God in the world. That's the only reason why you did it. And therefore, with this, he says, oh, at least I know for sure I did one mitzvah perfectly. And I think to us, it's empowering. If you do one mitzvah, not because someone will say, hey, look at this guy, look what he donated to the synagogue. Look, his name is all over it. Hey, he's so generous. And you do a mitzvah, hey, I do a mitzvah, look at me. Or you do a kindness, but you make sure to let everyone know, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you tweet it or something like that. Right? And for us, we're kind of wired, like, I want to have some sort of benefit. If I do something really good, I want everyone to know about it. And Judaism has the idea of like, no, if you're doing the mitzvah and you let everyone know about it, well, then you're kind of demoting the mitzvah from being a supernatural, spiritual activity to being something that you're doing kind of for PR. It's like the same action that you could do and achieve a spiritual legacy for all time. If you just say, you just take a picture of it, just show everyone what I did, okay, you'll get a reward, but the reward will be what you assign that reward to be. I was like, hey, pat on the back. What a guy, huh? What a swell guy to have in the neighborhood, right? Which is reward, but it's squandering an opportunity. You do it just because you want to do what God wants you to do.
Different levels of charity. One who gives because it's coerced, all the way down to the one who gives that
That's
doesn't
right.
know who's getting it and they don't know he's giving it. Type of.
So this is, I think, consolation for us. Now, I want to make a disclaimer. Just when the good news came, there's bad news. Not bad news, it's still good news. The caveat. From the text of these sources, it's clear that there is a vast difference between someone who dedicates their entire life either by 248 mitzvahs achieving completion or by dedicating their entirety with one act of devotion to God. There's a vast difference between their status in Olam Haba and the status of someone who does one mitzvah and he gains a ticket. Yeah, they both have a portion will to come, but the difference between the verbalization, the text, one of them says that this person is ushered into Olam Haba, and the person who does one mitzvah has a chelek Olam Haba, has a portion of the world to come. Of course, we hope and pray and yearn that we will too merit to have a portion of the world to come. But it pales in comparison to actually earning it top to bottom. But I think, so that's the caveat. So we shouldn't say, oh, phew, we are now exonerated for doing all the mitzvahs. Certainly not.
Someone online must have done something right,
Right, but we shouldn't say, I've been around for so long. I can't think of anything right now, but I'm sure it's happened, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm good, right? We can't get complacent, certainly. But it is rewarding, and also it's empowering to think about what one mitzvah can do. Every mitzvah can connect us to the Almighty. Olam Haba is a spiritual world. We do a mitzvah properly, and we assign no physical-centric objectives to that activity. Nothing. It's only done because of the spiritual world. If you do that, you're acknowledging the existence of that spiritual world. You're living with the keen realization that there's more to our existence than just what we see, what we can encounter with our physical senses. It's more than just getting old and dying, and it's just all of our life, everything, all the life of the billions of people in the world, and the billions of people that have lived. It's all about how can we suffer the least till we die. And that's what a lot of people think. And sometimes if we think about it, what's really life about? It's just like, okay, how do I earn a lot of money so that I can suffer less on my way down the cliff into the total abyss? That's the way a lot of people live their lives. And we say that no, this is just the pregame show. This is just a tiny sliver of existence that is inconsequential to our real life. But it's inconsequential in scope, but it matters the world towards what our life is going to be. Think about this. We're in the minors. We're in the minor leagues here. We're just walking down the corridor. That's what we are in life. We're walking down this corridor trying to do the best we can so that way at the end of the road, when we actually get to life, we get out of the training room, we get out of the road trip, we get to our destination, we should be in the best status possible. And the Almighty loves us and gives us so many mitzvahs. And every mitzvah is a golden opportunity. Every single one. It's just an opportunity to just improve your situation, to benefit, to betterment, to achieve more, and to improve and improve and improve and improve. And we have to kind of scoop up the mitzvahs like it's Black Friday. Right? You see Black Friday, that's what it's like. That's what life really should be. Everyone's like, oh, it's crazy. Mitzvahs are half off. Everyone just scoop. That's the way we should be. It's in the Black Friday of mitzvahs. And it's just the opposite. We have everything upside down, and all we care about is trying to Black Friday our kind of spiritual, our physical existence. But the opportunities with the mitzvahs are just so there. And, just imagine the agony and the despair and the depression that would accompany someone who had the winning ticket to the Powerball but can't find it. Right? Or their kid put it through a shredder. Can you imagine? Oh, or you did it. You're like, okay, I'm just shredding. Just imagine your life, just that pit that would descend into your stomach. Oh, but you just imagine that. That's what we're going to feel like when we realize the value of a mitzvah. That's what it was right in my hands, and I just put it through the shredder. Oh my goodness! I can't believe I did that. That's what we're going to feel, because suddenly we realize, the value that it has. I had we got a new. My wife finally got a social security name with her married name. We've been married 9 years and change now. So she had the passport, and everything was the same. And everything was kind of updated to her married name, besides for her social security number. And once they gave her a problem, so we just took care of it. But I put all my documents in the safe. I have a little safe for documents. So whatever. And it wasn't there because we just got it in the mail, whatever was hanging out. And my kid said, a nice little card. Wouldn't it be lovely to just cut, with a scissor? Wouldn't that be a great idea? So that's what he did. And I was like, just incredulity, right? What is going on here? But imagine you actually had the winning ticket at the lottery. You actually had it. And your kid just cut it up, made it really nice. It's like, Abba, look at my design. It's lovely. What did you do?
There'd have to be somebody stopping.
Could you imagine? Just the opportunity that you had and now it's lost. We value life, every single second of life, because every second we have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. We have opportunities. Do as many mitzvahs as we can. It's Black Friday. Not only that, it's sports authorities and Black Friday, they're going out of business. Right? They're going out of business as Black Friday. Everything's free. And we just scoop it up. And we're like, nah, I'll take care of it tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like when they talk about, hell, heaven, and hell. Hell is actually that feeling that you get when you realize that you didn't, because then your soul realizes
missed opportunities.
What the reality is, and that you didn't do those things. That's the actual real
Yes.
hell. It's not like a physical thing or burning or whatever. It's the understanding of what you did wrong.
And it's absolutely devastating.
Yeah,
It's devastation. But we learn, and it's not too late. Every second that our candle is still flickering, could still improve and fix. And like we said, it could be the day before we die, or the day that we die, we could change our lives on a dime. Right? But we have to start appreciating the value of a mitzvah and just seize them. They're right there. They're so easy. It's so easy. It's especially now in America. It's like I'm sure like our ancestors are like astonished at us. They're like, how much dedication did they have to do to like read a page of Talmud 1,000 years ago before it was all printed? You had to get a handwritten copy and you had to squint over it. And now we have it all online and there's apps and it's everywhere. It's just right there. All you got to do is you just got to open your mouth just a little bit. It's in you, And it's everywhere. How many mitzvahs we can do every day? Hundreds, thousands. But of course, we have this distortion. So, does that really matter? Does God really care what I eat? Or does God really care that, if I write 2 letters on Shabbos? It's so important to God, really? This is what God... And yeah, that is a physical-centric, question. Yeah, the physical world doesn't matter if you drive on Shabbos. It doesn't matter. Like, what does it matter if you drive on Shabbos? When you get hurt? No. But you have an opportunity to dedicate your lives to the Almighty. And a small investment, not small, it's a huge investment, but relatively small investment can reap tremendous benefits. And one thing's clear. Everyone agrees. The religious people, the not religious, the atheists, the people that haven't been born yet, people that are already dead, everyone agrees that humans are on a warpath to death. Everyone that's ever lived in all of human history has died. Thus, when we choose what to invest our efforts, our opportunities, our time in life, we have 2 options. We could choose in the physical, kind of material-centric life, or in the spiritual, the soul-centric life. That's the choices, really, roughly. What we know for sure is that any investment that we make in our physical and material life, it's an investment that's guaranteed to go to zero. Because you know what? Once you're dead, you don't benefit from it. We all know for sure, none of us here would even imagine that we're going to live for another 150 years. Maybe 100 years, but 150 years, right? We're dead. So it's like one of those 99-year leases, right? There's a maximum. It's not forever, for sure. And then on the other hand, we have an investment that can live forever. Our soul is around forever. And I'll ask you the question. Who is the person that finds a tremendously pristine beachfront property? And that person says, I'm going to build a house here, summer home. And he's going to build a house, and the neighbor knocks on the door and says, yeah, you're building this nice house. You should know, every year, the tide gets 5 feet closer to your house. And within 5 to 10 years, your house will be underwater. That's the way it's going to happen. Is there anyone that's going to build that house. Well, it's so cheap. I was wondering, like, why is this real estate so cheap? It's pristine property. Yeah, it's cheap and it's available. You could build a house and you could enjoy it. It'll be fantastic. But you know it's going to zero. You know that for sure. No one pays. Maybe you could have scuba divers. I don't know. Maybe there is some use for it. But if it's underwater, you can't live in that house, right? Every investment that we make in our physical, material life is guaranteed when we're dead to be of no use for us. Maybe it's a use for our kids. If we dedicate it towards something spiritual, it's a use for that as well. We don't eschew the physical, material world. We channel it towards spiritual. It's a simple equation, right? You can sit with your financial advisor. What are you going to invest in? Something that can maybe grow, but then it'll go down to zero. It's like one of those end run stories, right? Yeah, maybe you could churn it out a couple more quarters, but you know once the secret gets out of the hat, it's going down to zero. You're going to invest in that? Certainly not. And you're going to lock up your funds in that, and then you have the opportunity to invest in something which is around forever. It's just the cost-benefit analysis is so stark. The opportunity is so, it's so clear and present. Yet we are deluded into thinking that the only investment that makes sense is to make that beachfront property. It doesn't make any. We're just blinded. Our hope is that with our newfound appreciation of mitzvahs and our perspective of the value of mitzvahs, and indeed what the mitzvahs engender, and also what this tells us about what life is really about, wherein we have this other world, which is not some other world, it's the world, and this is just the preliminaries. And, it's I think, very inspiring and very rewarding and very gratifying to know that there's this bigger picture, and we're not just here to try to suffer as minimally as we can before we die. And also the value that we can have with our actions, and the value of every mitzvah, and the impact we can make on the world and ourselves and our family and our communities, dedicating ourselves to God and doing His mitzvahs. And hopefully we won't need to any end of life drama to achieve greatness. Hopefully we'll have it all. We could do all the mitzvahs. We could do many mitzvahs, as many as we can, lishma, with the intention of doing God's will. And by doing that, we kind of reshift what values we have in life. When you do a mitzvah, it's a reframing of priorities. You're shifting. You're making a slight break from the distortion that corrupts the perspective of humans. You're moving a little bit away towards a more clear perspective. Why? Because the only reason to do mitzvahs is because God told you to do mitzvah. And indeed, the mitzvahs that make no sense to us are the most potent towards helping us achieve that perspective. And our hope is that we'll gain a newfound appreciation of mitzvahs and try to do as many as we can. And remember, it's Black Friday. There's mitzvahs everywhere. Let's go grab them. And thank you all for listening and for inviting me here.
Amen.